When 6 cartel gunmen surround the isolated Peterson farmhouse at midnight, they see only an old rancher and his prized horses, easy pickings for their border territory expansion. What intelligence failed to reveal is why those stallions stand, unnaturally still, why their eyes track movement with military precision, and why the rancher speaks to them in coded German commands. As the first shot breaks the night's silence, 5 combat-trained cavalry horses, veterans of Afghanistan's most classified mounted special operations, shift from docile animals to tactical assets. Between the shadows of barn and pasture, the cartel discovers too late they've stumbled onto the retirement home of America's last horse soldiers, where both rider and mount remember exactly how battlefield chaos sounds. Tonight, hoofbeats replace gunfire as the last sound these intruders will ever hear. The leader, Matteo, raises his hand, signaling his men to hold position. Through his night vision scope, he studies the farmhouse. Simple, weathered, isolated, a perfect target. Their intel showed minimal security, just an aging rancher living alone with his horses, the perfect staging point for their expanded operation. Remember, we need the old man alive initially, Matteo whispers into his radio. He needs to sign the transfer papers, make it look legitimate. His second-in-command, Vega, nods silently beside him. Those horses, though, worth a fortune. Military grade. My cousin will pay top dollar. Matteo smiles coldly. Then we leave no witnesses. Get into position. From the darkened farmhouse window, retired Colonel James Peterson watches the shadows shift unnaturally across his property. His weathered hand reaches for the barn's remote floodlight switch, but stops. Instead, he moves to the fireplace and retrieves a small metal box from beneath the floorboards. Inside lies a satellite phone and a set of dog tags, not his. He turns toward the stable where his 5 horses stand unnaturally alert, ears perked, muscles tensed. 20 years of combat never leaves a soldier, or his horses. Seems retirements, getting cut short, boys, he whispers, more to himself than the animals. Then, almost inaudibly, heads a phrase in crisp German. In the stable, 5 pairs of eyes lock onto the farmhouse. Thunder, the lead stallion, paws at the ground once, his ears flatten against his skull. The night holds its breath. The first shot shatters the farmhouse window, and all hell breaks loose. Colonel James Peterson stood at the edge of his property, watching the sunrise paint the Texas sky in hues of orange and gold. At 62, his face was weathered like the land he now called home. Creases etched deep by desert sun and decades of military service. His tall frame remained imposing, despite the slight stoop that had developed in recent years. A souvenir from an IED in Baghdad, 15 years ago. The 500-acre ranch sat 30 miles from the nearest town, Valverde, and just 40 miles from the Mexican border. Isolation was precisely what Peterson had sought after 30 years of service, first as a conventional cavalry officer, then transitioning to what the military would only describe in classified documents as specialized, mounted operations. Coffee's getting cold, Jim. Peterson turned to see Sarah Mendez walking toward him, 2 steaming mugs in hand. At 48, the former Army veterinarian still moved with the precise efficiency that had made her invaluable during their deployments. Her dark hair now featured streaks of silver, and laugh lines had begun to form around her eyes. Just enjoying the quiet, Peterson replied, accepting the cup. Never get tired of it. Sarah nodded, understanding. Thunder's leg is looking better. That new medication is working. Good. Peterson sipped his coffee. He deserves a peaceful retirement. They all do. Thunder, Kaiser, Shadow, Athena, and Viper. 5 horses that had served alongside Peterson in Afghanistan's most classified operations. When Peterson finally retired 3 years ago, he'd pulled every string, called in every favor, to ensure his equine partners could retire with him. The military had been reluctant to release such highly trained assets, but eventually relented when Peterson agreed to certain conditions. You see Ramirez's truck go by last night? Sarah asked, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. Peterson nodded. 3rd time this week, getting a bit obvious with their surveillance. Miguel Ramirez was the public face of a legitimate agricultural business, but intelligence agencies had long suspected connections to the Navarez cartel. In recent months, his company had been buying up properties along this stretch of the border, sometimes after the owners experienced unfortunate accidents. Sheriff Daniels called yesterday, Sarah said. Wanted to make sure we're being cautious. Said there's been increased activity across the border. Activity across the border. Peterson snorted. Mike's a good man, but he's got no idea what he's up against if the Nevares are moving in. He mentioned a DEA presence in town. Undercover. Too little, too late. Peterson looked out at the barn where the horses were beginning their morning routine. Even in retirement, they maintained the discipline of their training. When cartels want land for smuggling, they take it. Authorities always play catch-up. Sarah put her hand on his arm. We could sell. Move somewhere less complicated. The old colonel shook his head. This is their home now. After what they've been through, what we asked of them, they deserve peace. They stood in silence, watching as 5 magnificent horses moved with unnatural precision through the morning mist. To an untrained eye, they might look like exceptional ranch horses. Peterson knew better. These animals had been selected and trained for the military's most classified mounted operations program. Able to move silently through terrain vehicles couldn't navigate, trained to remain calm under gunfire, and conditioned to respond to commands that would help operators navigate hostile territory undetected. I've got patients in town, Sarah said finally. After leaving the army, she'd established a veterinary practice in Valverde. Need anything while I'm out? Peterson shook his head. We're good here. After Sarah left, Peterson walked to the barn. The horses watched him approach, alert but calm. Thunder, the largest of them, a 17-hand black Frisian cross, approached the gate. His intelligent eyes followed Peterson's every movement. Morning, soldier, Peterson said quietly, running a hand along Thunder's muscular neck. The horse nickered softly. In response, Peterson moved through his morning routine, checking each horse, mucking stalls and refilling water troughs. Mundane, tasks that grounded him after years of high-stakes operations. As he worked, he couldn't shake a creeping sense of unease that had been building over the past weeks. After finishing in the barn, Peterson walked to a small shed behind the main house. He entered a code on a keypad, and the door clicked open. Inside, unlike the weathered exterior, was a small but sophisticated security center. Multiple screens showed different angles of the property. On one wall hung several weapons, expertly maintained. Peterson had never been paranoid, just prepared. He checked the security logs, noting 3 perimeter alerts during the night, all triggered by wildlife. Still, something felt off. He zoomed in on footage from the main road, watching Ramirez's black truck passing slowly by the property entrance the previous evening. The vehicle had slowed almost to a stop, lingering far too long for someone simply driving by. Peterson picked up his phone and dialed a number from memory. Richards! A gruff voice answered. It's Peterson. A pause. Colonel, been a while. Too long, Captain. Peterson watched the screen showing Ramirez's truck. How's retirement treating you? Boring as hell. You? Getting less boring by the day. Peterson hesitated. Remember our conversation about potential retirement neighbors? A longer pause. I recall. Problems. Not yet. But I'm seeing advanced scouts. Need a visit from old friends? Peterson considered this. Richard Garcia had served under him in the classified mounted operations unit, known officially as Task Force Pegasus. Like Peterson, he'd formed deep bonds with both his human and equine teammates. Not yet. Just wanted to put it on your radar. Consider it on. I can be there in 12 hours if needed. Peterson thanked him and hung up. He wasn't ready to call in reinforcements yet, but the comfort of knowing his former team was ready to respond steadied him. As evening approached, Peterson sat on his porch, rifle across his lap, not obviously threatening, but a clear message to anyone watching. The horses grazed peacefully in the paddock, occasionally raising their heads to scan the surroundings with an alertness that went beyond normal equine behavior. His satellite phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Staying in town tonight. Complicated surgery. Back tomorrow. Peterson texted back an acknowledgement, feeling a strange relief that Sarah wouldn't be at the ranch tonight. His instincts were rarely wrong, and tonight they were screaming. As darkness fell, he entered the barn and stood before his horses. Each animal watched him with focused attention. Listen up, Peterson said quietly, as though addressing soldiers. We might have company tonight. Thunder snorted softly, pawing the ground once. Peterson reached into his pocket and withdrew a small device. He pressed it once, and small green lights activated one Atch horse's halter. Custom-made equipment, that allowed Peterson to track their positions and give silent commands if needed. Just a precaution, he muttered, more to himself than the horses. Back in the house, Peterson methodically checked his security systems, weapons, and communications. He'd lived through too many ambushes to be caught unprepared. The satellite phone remained charged and ready, his direct line to former teammates scattered across the country. Around 11, he dimmed the lights in the house but left one lamp on in the living room, creating the silhouette of a man reading. Then he moved to a darkened room at the back of the house, with a clear view of both the property entrance and the barn. Something was coming. He could feel it in his bones, the same instinct that had kept him alive through 3 war zones. Peterson settled in to wait, his weathered hands steady on his rifle. Behind the house, 5 horses stood unnaturally still in their stalls, awaiting commands that hadn't been issued in years, but that none of them had forgotten. The night stretched on, quiet and tense, until the first vehicle approached just before midnight. Midnight arrived with the slow crunch of tires on gravel. Peterson watched through night vision binoculars as twin-marked SUVs killed their headlights and rolled to a stop half a mile from his main gate. 6 figures emerged silently, their movements disciplined and coordinated. Not local thugs, these were trained operators. Peterson reached for his satellite phone and typed a message to Richards. Visitors arrived, 6 armed, professional, standing by. He hit send, then pocketed the device. No immediate response needed. Richards would understand this was just situational awareness, not yet a call for help. Through his scope, Peterson watched the 6 men spread out and begin their approach on foot. They moved in a staggered formation, maintaining distance and cover, military tactics. Each carried what appeared to be an assault rifle, and Peterson noted the silhouettes of sidearms and tactical vests. So that's how it's going to be, he muttered. In the barn, the 5 horses had gone completely still. Their training had taught them that stillness meant survival. Thunder's ears flicked forward, detecting sounds far beyond human capacity. The big stallion's muscles tensed, ready. Peterson moved silently through his darkened house to the kitchen. He opened a drawer filled with ordinary utensils and pressed a hidden panel. The false bottom revealed a small case containing 5 specially designed earpieces. He took one and secured it in his ear. "Command system activate," he whispered. A soft tone confirmed the system was live. The earpiece connected to the sensors on the horses' halters, allowing him to monitor their status and issue commands remotely if needed. Peterson returned to his observation position. The intruders had reached his perimeter fence and were cutting through with practiced efficiency. He had perhaps 10 minutes before they reached the house. Time to make a decision. Most rational people would call for help, but the nearest sheriff's deputy was 20 minutes away at best. By then, it would be over, one way or another. Peterson considered his options with the cold calculation of a career soldier. 6 against 1 were terrible odds, but he had advantages: home territory, preparation, and assets the intruders didn't know about. His finger hovered over the silent alarm that would alert authorities, then moved away. A direct confrontation would endanger potential responders. Better to handle this himself. Peterson raised his rifle and sighted on the lead intruder, now clearly visible through his scope. One shot could change the equation immediately. His finger rested lightly on the trigger, then he paused. If he fired, there would be an investigation. Questions about his military background, the horses, the security systems. The program would be exposed. His promise to keep certain operations classified would be broken. Peterson lowered his rifle. Different approach needed. He moved to his security panel and pressed 3 buttons in sequence. Throughout the property, hidden cameras activated their infrared recording capabilities. Whatever happened tonight would be documented. Insurance. The intruders had split into 2 groups of 3, approaching from different angles. The first group headed directly for the house, while the second circled toward the barn. Peterson smiled, grimly. They were after the horses, just as he suspected. In his ear, a soft alert tone sounded. The proximity sensors on Thunder's halter had activated. The horse had detected the approach. 4 more tones followed quickly as the other horses registered the threat. Peterson moved to the back door and slipped outside, staying within the shadows. He circled behind an old oak tree, watching as the first group of intruders reached his porch. Their leader gestured silently. and one man placed what appeared to be a small charge on the front door lock. The second group had reached the barn. One man posted as lookout while two entered through the side door. Peterson tensed. Now they were in his territory. Inside the barn, the first intruder swept his weapon across the stalls, cataloguing 5 horses standing motionless in the darkness. He whispered into his radio, "Targets acquired. 5 animals as expected." His partner began preparing tranquilizer, darts. "These are worth at least 20K each to the right buyers." In the stall, Thunder's ears flattened against his skull. His nostrils flared, detecting the unfamiliar scents of gun oil, sweat, and adrenaline. Behind him, the 4 other horses remained perfectly still, awaiting commands. Peterson touched his earpiece and whispered, "Surveillance mode." 5 acknowledgement tones sounded in sequence. In the stalls, each horse's pupils dilated slightly as they shifted to their combat-trained hyper-awareness, a state that allowed them to absorb and process every detail of their surroundings. At the house, Peterson heard the muffled pop of the door charge detonating. The intruders would find his decoy set up, an empty house with just enough personal touches to make it appear lived in. His actual living quarters were in a fortified section beneath the main structure, accessible only through concealed entrances. Peterson's plan was forming. Let them search the empty house, becoming increasingly confused and agitated. Meanwhile, he would— A sharp crack of a broken branch interrupted his thoughts. Peterson froze as a third team he hadn't detected emerged from the tree line to his left. 2 more men, moving directly toward his position. Intelligence failure. There weren't 6 intruders, there were 8. Peterson calculated rapidly. He couldn't retreat to the house without being spotted. The barn was 30 yards away, but open ground stood between. His only option was to circle deeper into the property, draw these 2 away from the others, and eliminate the threat they posed. He began, moving silently through the underbrush, deliberately leaving subtle traces for the experienced trackers to follow. A disturbed patch of ground here, a bent twig there. Nothing obvious, just enough to lead them where Hugh wanted them to go. The 2 men took the bait, following the trail away from the house. Peterson led them toward the back paddock where a small stream created a natural boundary to his property. There, the terrain offered better cover and multiple escape routes. Meanwhile, the first team had breached the house. Their leader, Matteo, moved methodically through the darkened rooms, increasingly frustrated at finding no sign of the old rancher. "He's not here," he hissed into his radio. "Check the outbuildings." In the barn, the second team was preparing to tranquilize the horses for transport. One man approached Thunder's stall, tranquilizer gun raised. "Easy, big boy. You're going on a trip." Thunder stood perfectly still, eyes focused intently on the intruder. The man mistook the horse's stillness for docility and moved closer. "Friendly animals," he commented to his partner. "Makes our job easier." His partner laughed softly. "Military trained. These beasts probably cost the government millions." The first man reached for Thunder's halter. "And now they'll make us rich." At the stream's edge, Peterson had found his position. He crouched behind a large boulder, rifle ready. The 2 trackers were approaching cautiously, using proper tactical movement. They were good, but Peterson had spent decades training the best to be better. He waited until they were within 20 yards, then deliberately stepped on a dry branch. The sharp crack froze both men, weapons raising toward the sound. Peterson ducked as their first shots shattered the night's silence. The controlled bursts of suppressed automatic fire tore into the boulder and surrounding trees, but missed his position. Now, the engagement was active. The others would converge on this location. Time to change the equation. Peterson touched his earpiece and spoke a single word in German. Alarmbereitschaft. Alert status. In the barn, Thunder's head snapped up at the command. His muscles tensed. As the combat programming activated, beside him, 4 other horses shifted from passive to active stance. Electronic tones acknowledged the command in Peterson's earpiece. The man reaching for Thunder's halter noticed the change immediately. The sudden tension, the shift in the animal's eyes. He hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "Something's wrong with this horse," he muttered, stepping back. His partner looked up from preparing the transport trailer. "What?" "Its eyes. Look at its eyes." Before the partner could respond, 3 more shots echoed from the direction of the stream, louder now as the intruders switched to unsuppressed fire. The horses should have spooked at the sound, but instead, They became even more focused, ears pricked toward the commotion. "These animals are weird, man," the first intruder said, raising his tranquilizer gun again. "Let's just knock them out and—" Peterson's voice came through on their radio. "Angriff! Attack!" The intruder frowned, not recognizing the language or the voice. Who the hell? Thunder exploded into motion. Nearly 1,600 pounds of muscle and bone crashed against the stall door with precision and force. The reinforced wood splintered as the massive animal burst through. The intruder had no time to react before Thunder's shoulder slammed into his chest, sending him flying across the barn. He hit the wall with a sickening crunch and slumped motionless to the floor. His partner raised his rifle, but Athena and Kaiser had already broken free. The sleek grey mare circled behind while the chestnut gelding charged forward. Caught between them, the man fired wildly, missing both animals as they executed the flanking maneuver they'd been trained for in Afghanistan's mountain passes. At the stream, Peterson was pinned down by increasing fire. The original two intruders had been joined by two more from the house team. 4 against 1, and they were working to surround his position. A bullet splintered bark inches from his head. Peterson returned controlled fire, forcing the closest attacker to duck behind a tree. He checked his ammunition. 2 magazines left after this one, not enough for a prolonged engagement. His earpiece crackled with data from the horse's tracking system. All 5 were now free and moving with purpose. The barn team had been neutralized. One signature showed no movement, likely unconscious or dead, while another was moving erratically injured. Peterson smiled grimly. The odds were evening out. He keyed his microphone and issued another command. "Zerstreuen. Disperse." The 5 horses separated, moving through the darkness with supernatural awareness of their surroundings. Their hooves, once thundering against barn floors, now moved with ghost-like silence across familiar terrain. In Afghanistan, they had learned to navigate treacherous mountain paths without sound. The grassy Texas soil was far easier. Back at the house, Mateo received frantic communications from his barn team. The garbled report made little sense. Something about the horses attacking. He cursed, realizing the operation was falling apart. The simple grab-and-go mission had turned into something else entirely. "Find the old man," he ordered into his radio. "He's the key. Find him and this ends." At the stream, Peterson was preparing to relocate when he heard it. The subtle shift in the underbrush that no human would make. Thunder had arrived, moving through the darkness like a shadow. The massive black horse stopped 20 yards away, partially concealed by trees, awaiting further commands. Peterson touched his earpiece and whispered, "Positionieren." "Position," Thunder acknowledged with a soft electronic tone and began circling to the left of the attackers. Peterson knew exactly what would happen next. He'd drilled this maneuver countless times in training. One of the attackers noticed movement in the trees and swung his weapon toward Thunder's position. "I've got something," he began, but never finished the sentence. Peterson's shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground. The others immediately returned fire, pinning Peterson down again, but their attention had been split, creating the opening Thunder needed. The massive horse burst from the trees at full gallop, a black missile in the darkness. Before the closest attacker could react, Thunder slammed into him with a precision shoulder check that had been developed specifically for mounted combat operations. The man went down hard, his weapon flying into the underbrush. Peterson used the distraction to change position, circling to flank the remaining 2 attackers. Thunder disappeared back into the darkness as quickly as he had appeared. "What the fuck was that?" one of the remaining attackers shouted. "The horse! The fucking horse attacked Diaz!" "That's not possible." Peterson allowed himself a grim smile. That was exactly the reaction the program had counted on during its development. Nobody expects horses to be used as tactical assets. The confusion and disbelief created precious seconds of advantage. His earpiece indicated the other horses were now surrounding the property, positioned at strategic points. The operation was proceeding exactly as their training dictated. Secure the perimeter, isolate threats, neutralize systematically. Peterson sighted on the next attacker and squeezed the trigger. The shot caught the man in the leg, dropping him instantly. The final attacker, now alone and panicking, broke cover and ran toward the house, abandoning his wounded comrade. In his ear, Peterson heard the distinctive electronic tone that meant Shadow, the smallest and fastest of his horses, had intercepted the fleeing man. A moment later, The tracking signature showed the threat was neutralized. The man was no longer moving. 3 down, 2 injured, and Matteo still unaccounted for, along with at least one other intruder. The odds had shifted dramatically. Peterson's satellite phone vibrated. Richards had replied, "Response team assembling. ETA 3 hours. Hold position." Too late for that, Peterson thought. The situation was already in motion. He typed back quickly, "Engaged. Multiple threats neutralized. Cleanup may be required." Richards would understand the implication. This would need to be contained, evidence managed, narratives controlled. The program couldn't be exposed. At the house, Matteo realized he was losing control of the operation. Half his team wasn't responding, and the reports from the others made no sense. Horses attacking like trained soldiers, impossible. Yet something was hunting his men in the darkness. "Burn it," he ordered his remaining man. "Burn it all down. The house, the barn, everything." The man nodded and began preparing incendiary devices. Matteo checked his weapon and moved toward the back door. Somewhere out there was an old rancher who had somehow turned a simple intimidation and acquisition operation into a disaster. Matteo would find him, kill him, and salvage what he could from this mess. As he stepped onto the back porch, Matteo heard a sound that froze his blood, the soft nicker of a horse, very close by. He swung his weapon toward the sound, but saw nothing in the darkness. Then something large and powerful slammed into him from behind. Matteo crashed to the ground, breath knocked from his lungs. Above him loomed the silhouette of a massive horse, Viper, the youngest and most aggressive of Peterson's team. The chestnut stallion pawed the ground once, then positioned himself strategically between Matteo and the house. Struggling to his feet, Matteo raised his weapon. The horse's eyes gleamed unnaturally in the darkness, tracking his every move. Before he could squeeze the trigger, a voice cut through the night. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Peterson emerged from the shadows, rifle leveled at Matteo's chest. "Horses have excellent night vision. Viper here can see every twitch of your finger, and he's faster than your reflexes." Matteo hesitated, calculating odds. "What kind of rancher are you?" "The retired kind." Peterson took another step forward. "The kind who recognizes paramilitary tactics when he sees them. Navarre's cartel, I'm guessing." Surprise flickered across Matteo's face. "You know more than you should, old man." "I know your operation just failed spectacularly." Peterson gestured, slightly with his rifle. "Drop the weapon." A flash of movement caught Peterson's peripheral vision. Too late. The final cartel member had circled behind, emerging from the side of the house with weapon raised. Peterson swung his rifle, but knew he wouldn't make it in time. 2 shots cracked the night silence. Peterson braced for impact, but felt nothing. Instead, the cartel gunman collapsed, blood blooming across his chest. Behind him stood Sarah Mendez, her service pistol still raised in a perfect shooting stance. "You always did have lousy peripheral awareness, Colonel," she said calmly. Peterson allowed himself a brief smile. "Thought you were staying in town." "Changed my mind. Good thing." She kept her weapon trained on the fallen gunman as she approached. "He's done." Matteo used the distraction to make his move, diving toward Peterson. Viper reacted instantly, rearing up with a precision that came from years of specialized training. His hooves connected with Matteo's shoulder, sending him sprawling. Before he could recover, Peterson was on him, pressing the rifle barrel against his throat. "That was foolish," Peterson said quietly. Matteo glared up at him. "You're dead, old man. You have no idea what's coming. This was just the advance team." Sarah approached, her weapon now trained on Matteo. "Secure the others." "I counted 3 down by the stream and 2 in the barn." Peterson nodded. "One got away, took one of their vehicles." "We have maybe 20 minutes before they send reinforcements," Sarah said, professional and focused. She knelt beside Matteo. "You're going to tell us exactly who sent you and what they know about this place." Matteo spat blood. "I tell you nothing." Peterson touched his earpiece. "Command system. Locate status." 5 electronic tones responded in sequence. On the small display in his tactical glasses, Peterson saw the positions of his horses, each securing a different area of the property. Thunder stood guard over the injured men by the stream. Kaiser and Athena patrolled the perimeter. Shadow had returned to the barn to secure the intruders there. Viper remained with Peterson, eyes never leaving Matteo. We need to clean this up, Peterson said to Sarah. Richards has a team inbound, ETA just under 3 hours. Sarah nodded. Not enough time. We need to relocate. This had always been a possibility. Peterson had contingency plans for rapid evacuation, routes mapped, supplies cached, identities prepared. The program had taught him to leave nothing to chance. Prep the trailer, he told Sarah. I'll secure the prisoners. As Sarah moved toward the barn, Peterson hauled Matteo to his feet and marched him toward the wounded men by the stream. All 3 were still alive, though one was unconscious. Peterson zip-tied their hands and feet efficiently, then turned to Matteo. Last chance to tell me who sent you. Matteo's eyes burned with hatred. You think this is over? Ramirez wants this land. The cartel wants this land. They'll send more men. Ramirez. Peterson filed away the confirmation. How much does he know about the horses? A flicker of uncertainty crossed Matteo's face. Just that they're valuable, military grade, worth taking. Peterson studied him closely. He doesn't know about their training. What training? They're just expensive horses. Matteo looked toward Thunder, who stood motionless nearby, eyes fixed on the prisoners. Except, they're not, are they? What the hell kind of operation were you running? Peterson smiled thinly. Nothing you have clearance for. He secured Matteo with the others, then touched his earpiece again. Thunder Guard. The massive black horse moved into position, standing sentry over the bound men. Peterson had spent years training these animals to recognize and contain threats. In the mountains of Afghanistan, where vehicles couldn't go and helicopters couldn't land, the horses had proven invaluable for special operations. Their ability to move silently, navigate difficult terrain, and even engage hostiles directly had made Task Force Pegasus one of the military's most effective classified programs. Peterson returned to the house and grabbed his go-bag, always packed, always ready. Inside were essentials: cash, alternate IDs, weapons, emergency medical supplies, and a small hard drive containing encrypted files on the Pegasus program. He added the satellite phone and moved to the security room. He downloaded the night surveillance footage to a portable drive, then initiated the system's wipe protocol. No traces could remain. The program had to stay buried. Outside, Sarah had brought the specialized trailer around. Unlike standard horse trailers, this one had been custom built, with reinforced walls, secure compartments for equipment, and a small command center in the front section. The horses could travel comfortably while remaining operation ready. Anderson Ranch? Sarah asked as Peterson approached. He nodded. Their backup location, purchased under an alias 5 years earlier as part of the contingency plan. 300 miles north, remote enough for security, but close enough to reach in a single night's drive. What about them? Sarah nodded toward the bound cartel members. Peterson's expression hardened. Richards will handle it. They both knew what that meant. Richards and his team would ensure no connection could be made between the night's events and Peterson's true background. The official report would show a failed home invasion, perpetrators unknown, evidence inconclusive. The program would remain classified. Peterson whistled sharply, then spoke into his earpiece. Disengage and assemble. Thunder immediately turned from the prisoners and trotted toward the trailer. The other horses appeared from different directions, moving with purpose. Within minutes, all 5 were loaded and secured. Sarah took the driver's seat while Peterson made a final sweep of the property. In the barn, he checked the 2 intruders. One was dead, his neck broken from Thunder's initial charge. The other was alive but unconscious with multiple broken ribs and a shattered collarbone. Peterson zip-tied him and left him for Richard's team. As he turned to leave, his foot struck something metal. Looking down, he saw the tranquilizer gun the intruders had brought. Beside it lay a small case of darts. Enough to immobilize all 5 horses. Peterson pocketed one of the darts for analysis. If Ramirez or the cartel was specifically targeting military-trained animals, that information could lead back to the program. Before returning to the truck, Peterson made one final stop at the stream. The 3 bound men watched him with a mixture of hatred and fear. Matteo's eyes burned with particular intensity. "You're making a mistake, old man," Matteo said. "Running just confirms your guilt." Peterson knelt beside him. "I'm not running, I'm repositioning. There's a difference. Ramirez has connections, federal connections. They'll find you." Peterson smiled thinly. "Better men than Ramirez have tried." He stood and turned to leave. then paused. By the way, your intel was flawed. I'm not just a rancher. What are you then? Matteo asked. Peterson looked back at him. The last person you should have targeted. As Peterson walked away, Matteo called after him. This isn't over, you hear me? This is just beginning. Peterson didn't respond. In his experience, men like Matteo always thought they had the upper hand, right until Themament they discovered. They were hopelessly outmatched. Back at the truck, Sarah had the engine running. All set? Peterson nodded, climbing into the passenger seat. Let's move. As they pulled away from the property, Peterson looked back at the home he'd built for his retirement. Part of him knew he would never return, at least not as James Peterson, retired. Rancher. That identity was now compromised. Richards will need to know everything, Sarah said, as they reached the main road. If they're specifically targeting former Pegasus assets. Peterson nodded grimly. It's not just about the land. Ramirez mentioned the horses were valuable, military grade, heckled them. Could be coincidence. Could be they just recognized quality animals. Maybe. Peterson didn't sound convinced. Or maybe someone talked. Someone who knew about the program. The program's been dark for 3 years, Sarah reminded him. Only a dozen people had full clearance. People talk. Files leak. Secrets get traded. Peterson stared out at the darkened landscape. I need to contact Hendricks. Sarah glanced at him sharply. The general? That's escalating things. If the program's been compromised, he needs to know. The other handlers could be at risk. General Marcus Hendricks had been the commanding officer of Task Force Pegasus from its inception. Now serving in the Pentagon, he remained one of the few people with complete knowledge of the program and its operators. Sarah drove in silence for several miles, processing the implications. If Peterson was right, and someone was specifically targeting the horses from the program, this was bigger than a simple land grab. You think Ramirez knows what the horses can do? She finally asked. Peterson shook his head. Their reaction tonight suggests not. They were surprised when the horses engaged, but they knew the animals were military trained. Someone gave them that much at least. In the trailer behind them, 5 horses stood calmly, despite the motion of the vehicle. Their specialized training included transportation acclimation. They could remain operation-ready even after hours of travel. Thunder's massive form was visible in the trailer's security camera, his intelligent eyes alert even now. How much time do we have? Sarah asked. Peterson checked his watch. If Matteo's associate reached their backup, they could have people at the ranch within the hour, but they won't find much. And Richards? His team will be there in 2 hours. They'll clean up, make it look like nothing happened. Sarah nodded, focusing on the road ahead. And what about us? What's the play here? Peterson was silent for a long moment. We stick to the contingency plan. Get to Anderson Ranch, secure the location, assess the threat. And then? A cold smile touched Peterson's lips. Then we find Ramirez and explain the error of his ways. Sarah recognized that expression. She'd seen it in Afghanistan, when targets had made the mistake of underestimating Colonel James Peterson and his unusual tactical assets. None of those targets had lived to repeat their error. As they drove through the night, Peterson's satellite phone buzzed with a message from Richards. Team en route. Containment protocols initiated. Confirm status. Peterson typed back, mobile. Assets secured. Proceeding to backup location, Alpha. Richards's response came quickly. Understood. Will clean and sanitize. Contact when secure. Peterson pocketed the phone and settled back for the long drive. His mind was already working through scenarios, planning contingencies, assessing threats. Retirement had dulled his edge slightly, but decades of operational experience didn't fade so easily. In the darkness of the trailer, 5 horses stood ready, their specialized training making them unlike any other animals in the world. And in the cab of the truck, Colonel James Peterson, one of the military's most effective and classified operational assets, prepared to re-enter a world he thought he'd left behind. The confrontation at the ranch wasn't the end, it was just the opening move. Dawn broke as Peterson and Sarah approached Anderson Ranch. Located in the rolling hills of central Texas, the property sat nestled between 2 ridgelines, offering natural protection and clear sightlines in all directions. Peterson had chosen it specifically for its defensive advantages. Home sweet home. Sarah murmured as they turned onto the gravel drive. Unlike Peterson's primary ranch, this property appeared modest and unremarkable. An intentional deception. The weathered farmhouse and simple barn gave no indication of the sophisticated security systems and reinforced structures beneath the rustic exterior. Peterson scanned the perimeter as they approached. No signs of disturbance. Surveillance system shows all clear. They pulled around to the barn, a structure far larger than it appeared from the road. Sarah backed the trailer up to the wide doors, while Peterson entered a code on a concealed panel. The doors slid open silently, revealing a space that looked nothing like a typical barn inside. The interior featured reinforced stalls, advanced monitoring equipment, and a small medical facility. One wall held an impressive array of weapons and tactical gear. This wasn't just a contingency location. It was an operational base, disguised as a country property. Home again, Peterson said as he began unloading the horses. Each animal stepped carefully from the trailer, alert but calm. They'd been here before during training exercises and recognized the location. Sarah moved to a computer terminal and began checking security feeds. Perimeter is secure, no activity within 5 miles. Peterson nodded, leading Thunder to his stall. Let's get them settled, then contact Richards for an update. As they worked to settle the horses, Peterson's mind raced through next steps. They needed intelligence on Ramirez and his operation. They needed to determine how much the cartel knew about the Pegasus program. And they needed to contact the other handlers, former operators who, like Peterson, had retired with their equine partners. His satellite phone buzzed with an incoming message from Richards. Site secured. Packages delivered. No traces. The cryptic message confirmed that Richards' team had removed the cartel members and cleaned the scene at Peterson's ranch. Packages delivered meant the prisoners had been transferred to a secure facility for interrogation. Richards was thorough. There would be no connection to Peterson or the program. Sarah approached as he read the message. Good news. Richards has cleaned house. We're clear on that front for now. She nodded, then hesitated. Jim, something's been bothering me about last night. Peterson looked up. What? The way they came at us. The tactics. It wasn't just a grab operation. Sarah crossed her arms. They came specifically prepared to capture the horses alive. They had the right tranquilizers, transport equipment, everything. Peterson had noticed the same thing. Someone gave them very specific intelligence, but not complete intelligence, Sarah pointed out. They knew the horses were valuable and military trained, but they didn't know what they were actually capable of. Compartmentalized information leak, Peterson said thoughtfully. Someone who knew about the animals but not the full extent of their abilities. That narrows it down. Peterson nodded grimly. I need to contact Hendricks. This goes beyond Ramirez and local cartel activity. He moved to a concealed safe behind a false panel and retrieved a special communication device, a secure line to military command that bypassed conventional channels. As one of the Pegasus program's most decorated operators, Peterson had maintained this emergency connection even in retirement. This is Mustang, he said, after the connection was established. Priority Alpha communication for Thunderbird. There was a pause, then a gruff voice responded. Mustang, this is Thunderbird. Secure channel, confirmed. Report. Pegasus assets compromised at primary location, Peterson said, falling easily into the program's specialized terminology. Hostiles demonstrated partial knowledge of asset capabilities. Attempted acquisition, not elimination. Casualties? Hostile side only. All Pegasus assets secure at secondary location. General Hendricks was silent for a moment. Assessment of information compromise. Partial and specific. They knew the assets were military and valuable, but not their full capabilities. Targeted approach suggests insider knowledge. Another pause. Any identification of hostiles? Local cartel affiliated with Miguel Ramirez. Land acquisition appears to be the cover. Acknowledged. Stand by for further instructions. Maintain security. Protocols. The line went dead. Peterson returned the device to its hiding place, face grim. Hendricks's response had been professional but measured. Too measured. The general hadn't seemed surprised by the report. He knew, Peterson said quietly. Sarah looked up from where she was checking Athena's leg. Knew what? Hendricks. He wasn't surprised. Either he already knew about the attack, or he was expecting something like this to happen. Sarah's expression darkened. You think the leak came from inside the program? I think we need more information. Peterson moved to the weapon wall and began selecting equipment. How soon can you have the horses ready for local operation? They're good to go now. The trip wasn't long enough to require significant recovery. Sarah studied him. What are you planning, Jim? Ramirez has an estate 15 miles from here. Bought it 2 years ago when his agricultural business expanded north. Peterson checked the action on a suppressed pistol. Time to pay him a visit. Alone? That's not smart. Not alone. Peterson glanced toward Thunder's stall. I'll take Thunder. Just reconnaissance for now. We need to know what Ramirez knows and who told him. Sarah frowned. Too risky. His estate will be crawling with security after last night's failure, which makes it the perfect time. They'll be expecting us to run, not to counterattack. Peterson loaded a small pack with surveillance equipment. Besides Thunder, and I have done harder infiltrations in active war zones. Sarah knew better than to argue. Once Peterson had that look in his eyes, there was no dissuading him. At least take Viper too. He's the best at perimeter security. Peterson considered this, then nodded. Good call. Have them both ready at dusk. As Peterson prepared for the evening mission, Sarah established secure communications with the other Pegasus handlers. If Peterson was right, and someone was specifically targeting program assets, the other retired operators needed to be warned. The program had included 5 primary teams, each with a handler and 5 specially trained horses. Peterson's team had been the first and most successful, but the others had accomplished remarkable feats in their own right. Now scattered across the country in secluded locations similar to Peterson's ranch, these former operators maintained the same vigilant security protocols that had kept them alive in combat. By late afternoon, Sarah had confirmed contact with 3 of the 4 other handlers. All reported no suspicious activity, but were implementing enhanced security measures. The 4th handler, Captain Thomas Wilson, wasn't responding to secure communications. Concerning, but not yet alarming. Wilson operated on an irregular schedule and often went off-grid for training exercises. As dusk approached, Peterson donned tactical gear that had sat unused for 3 years. The familiar weight of the body armor, the comfortable grip of his combat knife, the secure fit of his tactical harness. It all came back immediately, muscle memory overriding the passage of time. Sarah helped him prepare Thunder and Viper for the mission. Unlike conventional military operations with horses, Pegasus teams used specialized equipment that enhanced the animal's natural capabilities while allowing for tactical communication and coordination. Each horse wore a custom combat halter with integrated electronics. Small sensors monitored vital signs and positioning, while secure communication devices allowed Peterson to issue commands remotely if needed. The halters included advanced night vision enhancements, specialized lenses that amplified the horses' already impressive night vision. Their hooves were fitted with specialized shoes that minimized sound while maximizing traction in various terrains. Command system check, Peterson said as Sarah finished securing Thunder's equipment. 5 electronic tones sounded in Peterson's earpiece, all systems operational. You have 4 hours, Sarah said as Peterson mounted Thunder. After that, I'm considering you compromised and implementing extraction protocols. Peterson nodded. Despite being officially retired, they still operated with military precision and protocols. 4 hours. If I'm not back, contact Richards and implement blackout procedures. Sarah understood. Blackout meant complete disengagement, abandoning the location, separating the assets, and retreating to deep cover. It was the program's most extreme contingency plan, to be used only when all other options were exhausted. Peterson guided Thunder out of the barn with Viper following silently behind. The 2 horses moved like shadows in the gathering darkness, their specialized training allowing them to navigate without sound. As they reached the perimeter of the property, Peterson activated their tactical systems and whispered a command in German, Schattenlauf, Shadow Run. Both horses immediately shifted into their infiltration mode, a specialized gait developed by the program that maximized speed while minimizing visual and auditory detection. In the mountains of Afghanistan, this technique had allowed Pegasus teams to move behind enemy lines without detection, accomplishing missions that conventional force considered impossible. As they moved through the Texas countryside toward Ramirez's estate, Peterson felt a familiar calm settle over him. The rhythm of Thunder's movement beneath him, the steady focus of a clear mission, the alignment of handler and horse in perfect operational sync. These sensations brought him back to the years when he had led America's most classified and effective special operations program. Tonight was just reconnaissance, but Peterson knew it was also something more. It was the beginning of his counterattack against whoever had compromised his identity and threatened his horses, and Colonel James Peterson had never been one to play defense for long. 15 miles away, in his luxurious estate, Miguel Ramirez was not having a pleasant evening. The failure of Mateo's team had created significant complications. 6 of his best men were missing, presumably dead or captured, and the valuable horses, assets worth millions on the black market, remained beyond his reach. "You guaranteed the old man would be taken by surprise," Ramirez said coldly to the man sitting across from him. "You guaranteed the horses would be easily acquired." "I told you what I knew," the man replied defensively. "That they were military-trained animals retired with their handler, valuable assets. I never said it would be easy." "You failed to mention the handler was a combat veteran with a sophisticated security system." Ramirez slammed his fist on the desk. "Or that the horses themselves would attack my men." The man shifted uncomfortably. "That wasn't in my briefing. The horses were supposed to be standard military mounts, valuable for breeding and training purposes, nothing more." Ramirez studied him with growing suspicion. "Who exactly are you working for, Mr. Harris? Because I'm beginning to think it isn't the defense contractor you claimed." Harris swallowed hard. "My information is solid. The old man was part of a mounted military program. The horses are worth millions. That's all I know." "Not good enough," Ramirez said quietly. "I've lost 6 men and gained nothing. Now I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with before I commit more resources." "I can make some calls," Harris offered quickly. "Get more detailed information." "You do that." Ramirez leaned forward. "You have until morning to tell me exactly who James Peterson is and what those horses are capable of. Otherwise, our arrangement is terminated. Permanently." Harris nodded nervously, understanding the threat. As Ramirez's security escorted him out, he pulled out a secure phone and dialed a number from memory. "It's Harris," he said when the call connected. "We have a problem. Ramirez's team failed. Peterson is still alive, and he knows someone leaked information about the program." He listened briefly, then continued. "Yes, I understand, but Ramirez is demanding more detailed intelligence." "No, I didn't tell him about Pegasus specifically, just that the horses were military assets." "Yes, I'll try to contain it, but—" He stopped suddenly, listening to the voice on the other end. His face paled. "You can't be serious. Ramirez has an army here. If you want Peterson eliminated, let Ramirez handle it." "I understand, but—" The line went dead. Harris stared at the phone for a long moment, then slowly pocketed it. As he walked toward his car, he failed to notice the 2 shadows moving silently along the perimeter of the estate, a man and a horse, observing his departure with great interest. Peterson watched through high-powered binoculars as Harris drove, away from Ramirez's main house. The man's face wasn't familiar, but his bearing and mannerisms suggested military or intelligence background. Definitely not cartel. Someone else was involved in this operation. Someone who had knowledge of the Pegasus program. "Interesting," Peterson murmured to himself. "Very interesting." He touched his earpiece and whispered, "Aufzeichnung." Record. The command activated the specialized camera integrated into his tactical glasses, capturing high-resolution images of the estate's security layout, personnel positions, and access points. This wasn't just reconnaissance anymore. It was pre-mission intelligence gathering. Peterson had come looking for information. What he found suggested a much larger operation than he'd initially suspected. This wasn't just a cartel land grab. Someone was specifically targeting Pegasus assets, using Ramirez and his organization as proxies. The question was, who? And more importantly, why now, 3 years after the program had been officially decommissioned? As Peterson prepared to withdraw, he spotted movement near the estate's rear entrance. A convoy of 3 black SUVs approached, their darkened windows concealing the occupants. Something about their formation and approach triggered Peterson's operational instincts. Those weren't cartel vehicles. The driving pattern, the spacing, the tactical approach, those were government operators, either federal agents or private military contractors with federal training. Peterson's suspicions deepened. If federal assets were meeting with Ramirez, this situation was far more complicated than he'd thought. It was time to retreat and reassess. Peterson had gathered enough intelligence for one night. He touched his earpiece again and whispered, "Rückzug, withdraw." Thunder and Viper acknowledged with soft electronic tones, then began moving silently away from the estate, staying within the shadows and using the terrain for concealment. As they melted into the darkness, Peterson's mind raced with implications and possibilities. Someone with knowledge of the Pegasus program was working with Ramirez. Someone with enough influence to coordinate federal assets. Someone who wanted the horses badly enough to risk exposing a classified program. Peterson needed to talk to Hendricks again, and this time he would demand straight answers. The game had changed, and Peterson refused to play defense any longer. As thunder carried him silently through the night, the retired colonel began formulating his counterattack. Behind them, Ramirez's estate continued its normal operations, unaware that America's most elite horse soldier had just scouted their defenses and discovered their secrets, unaware that the quiet night had just witnessed the opening moves of a war they never expected to fight. Sarah paced the length of the barn's tactical operations center, checking her watch for the third time in 15 minutes. Peterson was cutting it close to his 4-hour window. "Come on, Jim," she muttered. The security monitors showed no movement on the perimeter, but her instincts were buzzing with warning. Something felt off. Her satellite phone vibrated with an incoming message from Richards. Interrogation yielding results. Matteo talking. Will brief when secure. Sarah acknowledged the message, then froze as the perimeter alarm gave a soft chime, the specific tone that indicated authorized entry. She moved to the weapons rack and pulled a pistol, just in case. The barn door opened, and Peterson entered with Thunder and Viper, following silently behind. One look at his face told Sarah everything she needed to know. "It's bigger than Ramirez," she said. "Not a question." Peterson nodded grimly, dismounting. "Much bigger. Help me get them settled. We need to talk." As they removed the tactical gear from the horses, Peterson briefed Sarah on what he'd witnessed at Ramirez's estate. The mysterious Harris, the government-style convoy, the evidence of a larger operation at work. "Someone's using Ramirez as a front," Peterson concluded. "Someone with knowledge of Pegasus who's deliberately keeping him in the dark about the program's full capabilities." Sarah's expression darkened. That explains why they were surprised when the horses engaged. Ramirez thought he was getting valuable breeding stock, not combat-trained assets. Exactly. Peterson pulled up the surveillance photos on the tactical center's main screen. "And look at this vehicle formation. That's Federal Tactical Approach Protocol. Either government or contractors trained by government." Sarah studied the images. "DEA maybe? They've been watching Ramirez for months." "No. This is something else." Peterson pointed to one of the SUVs. "Look at the antenna configuration. That's SIGINT equipment, signal intelligence. DEA doesn't run that kind of hardware." "CIA? DIA?" Sarah suggested, naming intelligence agencies. "Possibly. Or private contractors with government connections." Peterson brought up another image, this one of Harris leaving the estate. "This guy is the key. Military bearing, secure communications, direct line to whoever's pulling the strings. Can you ID him?" Peterson shook his head. "Face wasn't in our database, but Richards might be able to help. He says Matteo is talking." As if on cue, the satellite phone buzzed. Richards had sent a secured file. The preliminary interrogation results. Peterson opened it on the secure terminal. "Matteo confirms Ramirez was contracted by a third party," Peterson read aloud. "Someone offering to clear all cartel activity in this sector in exchange for acquiring the horses and the handler, alive if possible." Sarah frowned. "That doesn't sound like a government operation." "No, it doesn't." Peterson continued scanning the report. Ramirez was told the horses were part of a classified breeding program that produced animals with enhanced cognitive abilities, valuable for both military applications and private security. "That's partially true," Sarah noted. "The breeding program was real. It's how we selected candidates for Pegasus. But the combat training is what made them truly unique." Peterson nodded. Ramirez was also told that if he acquired the horses, he'd receive full documentation on their training methods he could then sell to the highest bidder. "So someone's using the cartel to do their dirty work," Sarah concluded. "Get the horses without revealing their own involvement. Classic cutout operation." Peterson closed the file. "The question is who and why now. Pegasus has been officially inactive for 3 years. The program was decommissioned, the documentation classified. At the highest levels, Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking, what if it's not about what Pegasus was, but what it could be? Peterson looked at her sharply. What do you mean? Think about it. The program was successful, more successful than anyone expected. Horses, with the right training, proved to be incredible tactical assets in certain environments, where vehicles couldn't go, where air support wasn't feasible. Where modern technology failed, we succeeded, Peterson finished. But that doesn't explain the timing. Sarah moved to one of the computers and pulled up a news site. 3 months ago, Congressional Appropriations Committee approved new funding for alternative tactical mobility solutions for asymmetric warfare environments. Peterson's eyes narrowed. They're restarting the program, or something like it. Sarah clicked through more articles. And look who's heading the Appropriations Subcommittee. The screen showed a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, Senator William Howard, former Army general and longtime defense hawk. Howard, Peterson said quietly. He was one of Pegasus's biggest critics when it was active. Called it a waste of resources, said horses had no place in modern warfare. Interesting that he's now pushing for alternative tactical mobility, Sarah remarked. Peterson was connecting dots rapidly now. If they're restarting the program, they'd want the original animals as breeding stock. Our horses are the proven genetic baseline, and the original handlers for their expertise, Sarah added. But why not just approach you officially? Why this elaborate? Operation with Ramirez as a cutout? Peterson's expression hardened. Because official channels leave paper trails, because what they're planning isn't sanctioned, because they don't want us involved in the new program. They just want our assets. The satellite phone buzzed again. Another message from Richards. Wilson found dead. Ranch burned. Horses missing. Marshall and Stone going dark. Peterson felt ice form in his stomach. Thomas Wilson, the handler who hadn't responded to Sarah's warning, was dead. His horses taken. And now Marshall and Stone, 2 of the other handlers, were implementing blackout protocols, disappearing off the grid. It's happening, Peterson said quietly, showing Sarah the message. They're coming for all of us. Sarah read the message, her face paling. We need to go dark too, now. Peterson shook his head. No, running just delays the inevitable. We need to take the fight to them. How? We don't even know who them is yet. We start with Ramirez. Peterson pulled up the surveillance footage again. He's the visible part of this operation. We hit him. We force the others to show themselves. Sarah looked at him in disbelief. You want to attack a cartel leader's compound. That's suicide, even for you. Not attack. Extract. Peterson highlighted a section of the estate on the map. Harris is staying on site. The man who knows who's really behind this, who has direct contact with our mystery players. We get him. We get answers. Jim, that's insane. Ramirez has dozens of armed men at that compound. Peterson smiled thinly. Which is why they'll never expect a direct approach. Remember Kandahar, the Taliban commander's compound? Sarah's eyes widened. That was different. We had satellite support, extraction teams standing by. This is just us. Not just us. Peterson looked toward the stalls where 5 horses stood alert, sensing the rising tension. We have the most effective covert tactical team ever assembled. The horses are retired, Jim. They haven't run a real operation in 3 years. You think they've forgotten their training? Peterson gestured toward Thunder, who was watching them intently. Look at him. He knows something's happening. They all do. Combat instincts don't fade. Sarah wasn't convinced. Even if we could pull it off, what then? We'd have Harris, but we'd also have every cartel gunman in Texas hunting us, not to mention whoever's really behind this. One problem at a time. Peterson activated the tactical planning system, bringing up detailed satellite imagery of Ramirez's estate. Richards has a team. Once we have Harris, we rendezvous and let them handle the interrogation and extraction. Sarah studied the compound layout, professional training overriding her reservations. Security looks heavy on the main house. Where's Harris staying? Guest house, east side. Peterson highlighted the building. 2 guards posted outside. Internal. Security unknown, but likely minimal. Approach. From the river. It runs within 200 yards of the east perimeter. Light security on that side. They're relying on natural barriers. Sarah nodded slowly, the plan taking shape in her mind. Quick in and out. Grab Harris. Retreat to extraction point before they can organize a response. Exactly. Peterson brought up weather data. New moon tonight. Cloud cover expected. Optimal conditions for night movement. Despite her concerns, Sarah found herself falling back into operational planning mode. They had run dozens of missions like this in Afghanistan, quick extraction operations with minimal personnel and maximum efficiency. Richards can have an extraction team waiting here, she said, indicating a position 3 miles from the estate. But our window will be tight, 20 minutes max from breach to extraction. We've done more with less, Peterson reminded her, and we have better mounts than most special forces could dream of. Sarah couldn't argue with that. The Pegasus horses weren't just transportation. They were tactical assets with unique capabilities. In Afghanistan, Peterson's team had achieved the seemingly impossible time after time, largely due to the specialized training of both handlers and horses. I'll contact Richards, she said finally. But Jim, if this goes wrong, it won't. Peterson's confidence was absolute, because they're still underestimating us. They think we're running scared, playing defense. They don't expect us to take the initiative. And after we have Harris? What's the endgame here? Peterson's expression hardened. We find out who killed Wilson. We find his horses. And we make sure no one ever threatens our teams again. The determination in his voice reminded Sarah why Peterson had been selected to lead the Pegasus program. Behind the weathered exterior of a retired rancher still lurked one of the military's most effective tactical commanders, a man who calculated risks with cold precision and executed missions others deemed impossible. For the next several hours they prepared methodically. The horses were equipped with their full tactical gear, specialized saddles designed for silent movement, advanced electronics for communication and coordination, and custom shoes that minimized sound while maximizing traction. Peterson and Sarah armed themselves with suppressed weapons and non-lethal alternatives. Despite the seriousness of the threat, Peterson wasn't looking to escalate to lethal force unless absolutely necessary. A bloodbath would only complicate an already complex situation. Richards confirmed an extraction team would be in position by 0200 hours. The plan was set. Infiltrate Ramirez's estate from the river, extract Harris from the guest house, retreat to the extraction point where Richards' team would take custody of Harris, then return to Anderson Ranch to await intelligence from the interrogation. As dusk approached, Peterson stood in the barn checking his gear one final time. The familiar weight of the tactical harness, the reassuring presence of thunder nearby, it all brought back memories of countless missions in hostile territory. You sure about this? Sarah asked, adjusting her own equipment. Peterson nodded. This is what we were trained for, what we did better than anyone else in the world. That was then, she reminded him. We're not as young as we used to be. Peterson smiled slightly. Neither are they, he gestured toward the horses. But age brings experience, and right now, experience is what we need. As darkness fell, they mounted up. Peterson on Thunder, Sarah on Athena. The other 3 horses, Kaiser, Shadow, and Viper, would remain at the ranch, alert and ready if needed for backup or quick evacuation. Command system active, Peterson confirmed as his tactical display lit up. All communications secure. Sarah nodded, her own systems showing green across the board. Despite her earlier reservations, she felt the familiar calm of pre-mission focus settling over her. This was what they had been trained for: rapid response, adaptive tactics, operating independently in hostile territory. They rode out as night enveloped the countryside, 2 shadows moving silently through darkness. To any observer, they might have appeared to be nothing more than late-night riders enjoying the cool evening air. Nothing in their movement betrayed the military precision of their approach or the deadly seriousness of their mission. 15 miles away, in his luxurious estate, Miguel Ramirez was growing increasingly frustrated with Harris. You promise me information, Ramirez said coldly. Yet you tell me nothing I don't already know. Harris shifted uncomfortably in his chair. My sources are being cautious. After last night's failure, questions are being asked. No one wants to be connected to this operation. Your sources promised me valuable military assets, Ramirez countered. Instead, I lost 6 men to an old rancher and his horses. Horses that somehow fought back like trained soldiers. Harris swallowed hard. That wasn't supposed to happen. The animals were supposed to be valuable breeding stock, nothing more. Clearly, your intelligence was flawed. Ramirez leaned forward. Now I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with before I commit more resources. Harris hesitated, then seemed to reach a decision. The horses were part of a classified program, Task Force Pegasus. More than just breeding stock, they were trained for direct combat operations. Ramirez's eyes narrowed. Combat horses? In the 21st century? You expect me to believe the US military trained attack horses? Not attack horses, Harris corrected. Tactical mobility assets with specialized training. In certain environments, mountains, dense forests, areas where vehicles can't operate effectively. They proved remarkably successful. And the old man, this Peterson, Colonel James Peterson, former commander of Task Force Pegasus, one of the military's most effective special operations officers. His official record is mostly classified, but he ran some of the most successful covert operations in Afghanistan. Ramirez processed this information slowly. You're telling me my men attempted to rob a special forces commander with combat-trained horses? Harris nodded uncomfortably. That's why we needed to approach carefully. Why the operation was designed to appear as a simple land acquisition. Yet you failed to mention any of this before I sent my men, Ramirez said, anger evident in his voice. 6 men who are now missing, presumably dead. The operational security around Pegasus was absolute, Harris explained. I only received this additional intelligence after last night's incident. Ramirez wasn't convinced. And why exactly does your employer want these horses? The truth this time. Harris hesitated again. The program is being reactivated under a different name. The original animals are genetically optimal for the new breeding program. Their offspring would take years to train from scratch. But with the original bloodlines and their handlers' expertise, the timeline could be accelerated significantly. And the payment my organization was promised for acquiring these assets? Still on offer, Harris assured him quickly. Double, in fact, given the increased risk. Ramirez studied him carefully. The offer was tempting. Enough money to expand his operation substantially. But the risk had just increased exponentially. He wasn't dealing with a simple rancher, but a highly trained military operator with unique tactical assets. I'll need to bring in additional men, Ramirez said finally, and better equipment. Harris nodded. My employer anticipated this. The resources you need will be provided. And if Peterson retaliates before we're ready, Harris smiled with false confidence. He won't. Men like Peterson follow protocols. Right now, he'll be implementing his emergency procedures, relocating, going to ground, activating his old networks for support. We have time to prepare. Outside Ramirez's estate, moving silently through the darkness toward the river approach, Peterson and Sarah had no idea that Harris was, at that very moment, underestimating their response. They were already far beyond following standard security protocols. They weren't retreating. They were attacking. And as Thunder and Athena carried them swiftly through the night, both horses moving with the silent efficiency that had made them legendary in classified mission reports, Peterson allowed himself a grim smile. The hunt was on, but this time, he wasn't the prey. The river flowed black as oil under the moonless sky. Peterson and Sarah guided their horses silently through the shallow water, using the current to mask any sound of movement. Both wore night vision equipment that transformed the darkness into shades of green, revealing the approaching shoreline of Ramirez's property. 2 perimeter guards, Sarah whispered, indicating heat signatures visible through her thermal scope. Moving in predictable patterns, Peterson nodded. Amateur security. 3-minute rotation leaves a constant blind spot on the east approach. They halted the horses in the shadows of overhanging trees at the water's edge. Thunder and Athena stood perfectly still, their specialized training allowing them to maintain complete silence, even while standing in flowing water. Peterson checked his tactical display. We have 18 minutes until their security team rotates, shifts. That's our window. Sarah nodded, adjusting her equipment one final time. Stick to non-lethal unless absolutely necessary. Correct. This is intelligence gathering, not retribution. Peterson touched his earpiece. Forwards. Advance. Thunder and Athena moved forward in perfect synchronization, emerging from the water. without a splash. Their specialized shoes distributed their weight to prevent sinking into the soft riverbank, leaving minimal tracks. They approached the first guard post at the precise moment when both guards were facing away, caught in the blind spot. Peterson had identified 20 years of tactical operations had taught Peterson to exploit such predictable security patterns. Amateurs relied on manpower, professionals understood timing. Sarah dismounted first, moving with the fluid grace of someone half her age. Years of specialized training hadn't faded. She circled behind the first guard while Peterson approached the second. They struck simultaneously, quick pressure on specific nerve points, a technique developed by the program for silent neutralization. Both guards slumped unconscious without a sound. Peterson and Sarah secured them with zip ties and concealed them in the underbrush. Total elapsed time, 48 seconds. Perimeter breached, Sarah confirmed over their secure channel. They remounted and continued toward the guest house, keeping to the shadows and using the estate's own landscaping as cover. The horses moved with uncanny awareness, navigating between security cameras without guidance. Peterson's tactical display showed the guest house now just 100 meters ahead. 2 more guards stood outside the main entrance, both alert and well-armed. Direct. Approach too risky, Peterson said quietly. We'll use blind corner protocol. Sarah nodded, understanding immediately. It was a technique they'd perfected in Afghanistan for extracting high-value targets from guarded buildings. Peterson touched his earpiece. A blenkung. Distraction. Thunder immediately understood the command. The massive horse moved away at a tangent, circling wide around the guest house toward its rear. Meanwhile, Peterson and Sarah dismounted, preparing their approach from the opposite side. As Thunder reached position, Peterson whispered another command. Auslöser. Trigger. Thunder reared suddenly, hooves striking a decorative metal sculpture in the garden. The crash echoed through the quiet night, instantly drawing the attention of both guards. They moved toward the sound, weapons raised. Now, Peterson signaled. They moved swiftly to the unguarded entrance. Sarah bypassed the electronic lock with a specialized device, while Peterson covered her. The door clicked open silently, and they slipped inside. The guest house was luxuriously appointed but small, just 3 rooms. The bedroom door stood partially open, light spilling from within. Peterson could hear Harris speaking, apparently on a phone call. Yes, I understand the urgency, Harris was saying. But we need to move carefully. Peterson's not a typical target. The failed raid proves that. Peterson and Sarah exchanged glances. Harris was talking to his mysterious employer. Of course, Wilson's death can't be tied back to us, Harris continued. It was staged perfectly. Local authorities already suspect cartel violence. A pause. The horses, in transit. The senator will be pleased. Peterson felt cold anger surge through him. Wilson's death hadn't been an accident or collateral damage. It had been a deliberate assassination, and his horses were already being transported elsewhere. Sarah signaled that they should wait, letting Harris continue the conversation to gather more intelligence. I'm handled Ramirez for now, Harris went on. Yes. I had to tell him more about Pegasus than we planned, but not the full story. Just enough to keep him committed. Another pause. The prototypes? No, he doesn't know about those. That stays completely compartmentalized. Prototypes. The word hung in the air. Peterson and Sarah exchanged concerned glances. What prototypes? The other handlers are going to ground as expected, Harris said. Yes, Marshall and Stone. But they'll be found. Our intelligence assets are tracking them. A longer pause. Peterson. No sign of him yet, but he's predictable. He'll follow protocol, reach out to his old network. When he does, we'll have him. Peterson had heard enough. He signaled to Sarah and they moved into position on either side of the bedroom door. 3. Peterson mouthed silently. 2. 1. They burst into the room simultaneously. Harris spun toward them, dropping his phone in shock. Before he could reach for the weapon on the bedside table, Peterson had him pinned against the wall, forearm pressed against his throat. Hello, Harris, Peterson said quietly. Seems you've been expecting me. Harris's eyes widened with recognition, then fear. Peterson, how did you get in here? The same way I got into Taliban strongholds. The same way I extracted high-value targets from places far better defended than this. Peterson increased the pressure slightly. The way I was trained to. Sarah quickly secured the room, checking for additional threats and retrieving Harris's. Dropped phone. Call disconnected, she reported. But they'll know something's wrong. Peterson nodded. We're on a clock now. He turned his attention back to Harris. You're coming with us. Quietly and cooperatively would be best for your health. Harris swallowed hard. You don't understand what you're dealing with, Peterson. This goes higher than you can imagine. Senator Howard? Yes, we pieced that much together. Surprise flickered across Harris's face. Then you know this isn't something you can fight. The senator has resources you can't match. We'll see about that. Peterson zip-tied Harris's hands. Right now, my concern is finding Wilson's horses and making sure Marshall and Stone stay safe. Harris laughed bitterly. You're too late for Wilson's horses. They're already at the research facility. And as for Marshall and Stone, their locations were compromised hours ago. Teams are moving on them as we speak. Peterson felt ice form in his stomach. If Harris was telling the truth, the other handlers were in immediate danger. But there was something else in Harris's demeanor, a confidence that seemed out of place for a man who had just been captured. Sarah, check him for tracking devices, Peterson ordered suddenly. Sarah quickly patted Harris down, then ran a scanner over him. It beeped when passing over his left forearm. Subdermal tracker, she confirmed, examining the area more closely. Military grade, and recently implanted. Peterson understood immediately. They're tracking him. They know exactly where he is right now. And they know exactly where you are too, Harris said with a smirk. Did you really think it would be this easy? That I'd be left here unprotected? As if on cue, the distant sound of helicopter rotors became audible, growing louder by the second. Sarah moved to the window. Black Hawks, 2 of them, coming in fast. Peterson processed this rapidly. Black Hawk helicopters meant military or paramilitary forces, not cartel. This was an entirely different level of threat. Change of plans, he said tersely. We extract now, interrogate later. He quickly gagged Harris to prevent him from calling for help, then activated his communication. Link to Thunder and Athena, not fall. Sammelplatz dry. Emergency, rally point 3. The confirmation tones sounded in his earpiece. Both horses were responding, moving to the predetermined emergency extraction point. We have maybe 2 minutes before those choppers are overhead, Sarah said, gathering their equipment. And Ramirez's security will be responding to the noise. Peterson nodded, hauling Harris to his feet. Rear exit. We'll intercept Thunder and Athena at the tree line. They moved quickly through the guest house and out the back door, keeping to the shadows. Harris struggled briefly, but stopped when Peterson applied pressure to a specific nerve point, another technique developed by the program. Cooperate, and this goes easier for everyone, Peterson warned him quietly. The helicopter sounds were growing louder, searchlights now visible in the distance. They were conducting a search pattern, methodically sweeping the estate grounds. Peterson and Sarah half-dragged Harris toward the tree line, staying low and using the ornamental landscaping as cover. They had almost reached the relative safety of the trees when floodlights suddenly illuminated the entire area. Down! Peterson shouted, pulling Harris to the ground as searchlights swept over their position. One of the Black Hawks hovered directly overhead now, its downdraft bending the trees and creating a deafening roar. From the other helicopter, fast ropes deployed and dark figures began descending rapidly. Tactical team, full gear, moving with the precision of elite operators. Federal? Sarah shouted over the noise. Peterson shook his head. Private military, look at the equipment. The operators wore no identifying insignia. Their gear a mix of military standard and specialized equipment, not typically issued to government forces. This was a private contractor team, expensive, elite, and operating outside normal chains of command. We're outgunned, Sarah acknowledged grimly. Peterson assessed their options rapidly. The extraction point was still 200 meters away. The trees provided some cover, but with thermal imaging, the helicopter teams would find them quickly. They needed a diversion. Peterson touched his earpiece again. Aufstörung, volle Intensität, disruption, full intensity. In the distance, Thunder's acknowledgement tone sounded. Then, from the opposite side of the estate, came the sound of chaos. The unmistakable noise of a horse crashing through the security perimeter at full gallop, alarms blaring in its wake. The reaction was immediate. One of the helicopters peeled away, searchlights swinging toward the new disturbance. Half the tactical team redirected, assuming the commotion was Peterson attempting to escape. Now, Peterson said, hauling Harris up. "We have 30 seconds. They ran for the tree line, reaching it just as shouts erupted behind them. Gunfire cracked. Warning shots, aimed high but a clear signal that the team was authorized to use lethal force if necessary. Inside the tree cover, Athena waited, standing perfectly still despite the chaos around her. The mare's training allowed her to remain calm even under gunfire and helicopter downdraft, essential capabilities for the high-stress environments of combat operations. Peterson secured Harris across Athena's back, then climbed up behind him. Sarah would have to wait for Thunder to return from his diversion mission. "Rally point 3, Peterson reminded her. "I'll secure the package." Sarah nodded, taking cover deeper in the trees. "Go. I'll be right behind you." Peterson hesitated only, briefly, then urged Athena forward. The mare responded instantly, moving through the trees, with supernatural awareness, avoiding branches and roots that would have tripped any normal horse in the darkness. Behind them, the security forces were organizing a perimeter, the second helicopter now hovering directly over the tree line, searchlights stabbing through the canopy. They had minutes at most before the entire area was locked down. Peterson guided Athena toward a small creek that ran through the property, knowing the water would help mask their heat signature from thermal imaging. The mare entered the water, without hesitation, moving rapidly downstream away from the estate. After 500 meters, Peterson directed her up the bank and into denser forest. Here, the canopy would provide better concealment from aerial surveillance. Athena's breathing remained controlled, her pace steady, the result of years of specialized training for exactly this type of high-pressure extraction. Harris remained silent, clearly recognizing the futility of resistance while secured to a horse moving rapidly through dense forest in darkness. His earlier confidence had faded, replaced by the grim realization that he was now caught between two dangerous forces, Peterson and whoever had sent the helicopter team. Peterson checked his tactical display. They were 2 kilometers from the estate now, moving toward the emergency extraction point where Richard's team was supposed to be waiting. But given the unexpected helicopter response, Peterson couldn't be certain the extraction point wasn't compromised as well. He activated his secure communication channel. "Watchdog, this is Mustang. Extraction point may be hot. Confirm status." Richard's voice came back immediately. "Mustang, be advised, we have unidentified aircraft in the area. Have relocated to secondary extraction point. Send authentication." Peterson provided the necessary code phrase, then adjusted his course toward the secondary location, an abandoned gas station 3 kilometers further east. His thoughts turned to Sarah. Thunder was the most combat-capable of all the Pegasus horses, but the diversion mission had placed him directly in harm's way. The stallion would be executing his training perfectly, creating maximum disruption while avoiding direct confrontation, then disengaging to retrieve Sarah. Peterson forced himself to focus on the immediate mission. Get Harris to Richards, extract critical intelligence, then deal with the threat to the other handlers. They continued through the forest for another 10 minutes before emerging onto a disused farm track. Here, Peterson allowed Athena to increase her pace to a smooth canter that ate up the distance, while remaining relatively quiet. As they approached the abandoned gas station, Peterson slowed Athena and scanned the area carefully. 2 unmarked SUVs were parked behind the dilapidated building, engines off, no lights visible. Standard covert positioning. Peterson activated his communication again. "Watchdog, visual contact established, approaching from the east. Confirmed. Mustang, we have you on thermal. Area is secure." Still cautious, Peterson guided Athena in a wide circle around the building, confirming there were no additional vehicles or personnel hidden from view. Only when satisfied did he approach directly. Richards emerged from the shadows, accompanied by 2 operators in tactical gear. The former captain had aged since Peterson last saw him, grey now dominating his close-cropped hair, but his movements retained the fluid efficiency of a career special operator. "Colonel," Richards said by way of greeting. "Package secure?" Peterson nodded, dismounting and helping the bound Harris down from Athena's back. "1 high-value intelligence asset, as requested." Richards studied Harris with cold professionalism. "Harris, interesting. Last I heard you were working security consultation for Defense Department contractors." Harris said nothing, his eyes darting between the operators as if calculating odds. "Where's Dr. Mendez?" Richards asked, noting Sarah's absence. "Exfiltrating separately. Thunder created a diversion." Peterson handed Harris over to the waiting operators. We had the unexpected company. Black Hawks, private military contractors. They knew exactly where to find him. He indicated the subdermal tracker in Harris's arm. Richards frowned. That complicates things. We need to move quickly. One of the operators was already prepping a field surgical kit to remove Harris's tracker. The other secured him in one of the SUVs. What about Sarah? Peterson asked. Richards checked his watch. If she doesn't make the rendezvous in 15 minutes, we implement package secure protocol. Your intelligence asset takes priority. Peterson knew he was right, but the thought of leaving Sarah behind went against everything he believed. Thunder will get her out. He's never failed a mission. Let's hope that record stands, Richards said grimly. In the meantime, we need to relocate. This area will be swarming with search teams soon. As the operator finished removing Harris's tracker, a small device the size of a grain of rice, Peterson's satellite phone buzzed with an incoming message. He checked it quickly, hoping for word from Sarah. Instead, it was a news alert that sent ice through his veins. Fire reported at Wilson Ranch. 1 fatality confirmed. Police investigating possible cartel connection. The official story was already being established. Wilson's death was being publicly attributed to cartel violence, exactly as Harris had described in his phone conversation. Peterson showed the alert to Richards, whose expression darkened. They're cleaning house, eliminating everyone connected, to Pegasus while establishing a cover story. And now they want us, Peterson said grimly. All of us. A sudden crackle came from Peterson's earpiece, the emergency channel used by the horse's tracking system. Thunder's signal was moving rapidly, closing on their position from the southwest. We have incoming, Peterson said. Friendly. Minutes. Later, Thunder emerged from the darkness, moving at a ground-covering trot that betrayed no fatigue despite the night's exertions. Sarah was mounted, her tactical gear scuffed but intact. Perimeter breach successful, she reported as she dismounted. But they're forming search teams, quad patterns with air support. We have maybe 20 minutes before they reach this position. Richards nodded. Then we move now. Dr. Mendez, you'll come with us. Colonel, you take the horses and head for the fallback position. We'll rendezvous when we've extracted what we need from our guest. Peterson started to protest, but Sarah cut him off. He's right, Jim. The horses are too valuable to risk capture. Get them to safety. I'll handle the interrogation. I know what questions to ask. Peterson knew they were both correct tactically. The horses were primary targets. If whoever was behind this operation got hold of Thunder and Athena, they would have 2 of the most valuable Pegasus assets. 12 hours, Richard said. If we haven't made contact by then, I know the protocol, Peterson confirmed grimly. Blackout and dispersal. As the operators prepared to depart with Harris, Peterson approached Thunder and Athena, checking both horses quickly for any injuries from the night's operation. Despite the high-stress extraction, both animals appeared calm and focused, their specialized training allowing them to process the chaos of combat without the panic that would affect normal horses. Sarah joined him for a moment. Be careful, Jim. If Harris was telling the truth, they're already moving on Marshall and Stone. Peterson nodded grimly. I'll warn them, then find somewhere secure to hold until you extract what we need from Harris. And if what he knows isn't enough, Peterson's expression hardened. Then we take this all the way to the top, to Senator Howard himself if necessary. Sarah touched his arm briefly, a gesture that conveyed more than words could. They had served together for 15 years, facing impossible odds in the world's most dangerous places. This mission was just one more. See you in 12 hours, she said, then turned to join Richards and his team. Peterson mounted Thunder, with Athena following on a lead line. As Richards' SUVs pulled away into the darkness, Peterson guided the horses in the opposite direction, toward the fallback position they had established, a hunting cabin deep in the national forest 30 miles north. As they disappeared into the night, neither Peterson nor Sarah could have anticipated the true scope of what they had stumbled into, or how high the cost of uncovering the truth would be. Dawn broke as Peterson reached his backup location, a hunting cabin in the central Texas hills. After securing Thunder and Athena, he discovered a tracking device concealed in Thunder's halter. Someone close had betrayed him. Peterson received disturbing messages. Wilson found dead, his horses missing, Marshall and Stone implementing emergency protocols. The systematic targeting of all Pegasus handlers pointed to something far beyond a cartel land grab. Researching Senator Howard, Peterson discovered his connection to a defense contractor called quantum dynamics, and a classified program called Project Centaur. Before he could investigate further, his cabin's security alarms activated. Professional operators had tracked him. Peterson escaped with the horses just before the cabin was breached. As they moved through the wilderness, he monitored encrypted communications that revealed Harris, the mysterious figure from Ramirez's estate, speaking with someone about prototypes and neural mapping. Meanwhile, Sarah and Richards discovered horrifying information from Harris's interrogation. Project Centaur wasn't just continuing the Pegasus program, it was transforming it into something that violated fundamental ethical boundaries involving genetic hybridization and neural interfaces. Most shocking of all was the revelation that Dr. Adrian Kelso, whom Peterson believed had died in Afghanistan, was alive and heading Project Centaur's research division. The truth was far worse than they had imagined. At an abandoned water tower, Peterson received an emergency message from General Hendricks. Do not proceed to rendezvous with Richards. Compromised. Kelso is alive. Project Centaur is Omega-level security breach. Trust no one without Indigo 7 authentication. Before Peterson could process this, he detected approaching operators. Despite his precautions, they had found him again, suggesting his communications were compromised. After evading them, Peterson observed the planned rendezvous point from a distance and confirmed it was surrounded, a well-prepared ambush. As night fell, Peterson encountered something impossible, a horse moving with unnatural grace and intelligence, clearly modified beyond normal equine capabilities. The strange horse led him to an abandoned research station where Peterson found a saddlebag containing a message from Sarah. Her note revealed the horrifying truth. Project Centaur had created genetically modified courier horses with enhanced cognitive function. More importantly, they wanted the original Pegasus horses for neural mapping, not just genetics. The modified horses were unstable without neural templates from the originals, a process that would kill Thunder and Athena. The mysterious courier horse delivered this intelligence before disappearing into the night. Peterson now understood the full scope of the threat and realized he needed to take the fight directly to Project Centaur. Peterson traveled to Afghanistan using a backup identity while arranging separate transportation for Thunder and Athena. The intelligence from Sarah revealed Project Centaur's ultimate goal: autonomous equine units with human-level tactical decision-making, classified as animals rather than weapons to circumvent ethical restrictions. In Kabul, Peterson connected with Davis, a former Special Forces operator running a private security firm. Davis provided critical equipment and intelligence, warning that military contractors were already searching the border regions for biological research materials. After reuniting with the horses, Peterson traveled through treacherous mountain passes toward the rendezvous point in the Korengal Valley, the site of a previous mission where they had staged a daring extraction years earlier. Peterson reached the cave system to find Sarah waiting. She confirmed Wilson and Stone were dead, and military contractors were establishing positions throughout the region. Most disturbing was the nearby research facility where Project Centaur was conducting operations just across the Pakistani border. Instead of attempting to escape, Peterson proposed a bold counterattack. We go straight through their forward research facility. Under cover of darkness, Peterson and Sarah infiltrated the facility, using the horses' extraordinary capabilities to bypass security systems. They created a diversion on one side of the compound while entering through a maintenance access point. On the opposite side, inside, they discovered horrifying evidence. Tissue samples from the original Pegasus horses collected during decommissioning, and preserved brain tissue from Wilson's horses, proof that Project Centaur was harvesting neural material from the animals they captured. As they gathered intelligence, security forces detected them. Peterson made a critical decision. Sarah would escape with the intelligence while he created a diversion to cover her extraction. The intelligence is priority one, he insisted, giving her the crucial data before turning to face approaching security teams. Thunder charged the first security team with combat precision, while Peterson provided covering fire. Their extraordinary partnership allowed them to break through multiple containment attempts as Peterson deliberately drew pursuit away from Sarah's escape route. Peterson and Thunder fought their way through the facility, exploiting the fact that security forces wanted to capture Thunder alive rather than risk killing him. Using this hesitation to his advantage, Peterson created chaos throughout the complex, eventually escaping through a maintenance shaft. They rendezvoused with Sarah and Athena at the extraction point, where Sarah confirmed she had reviewed the intelligence data. The neural mapping they performed on Wilson's horses, it's barbaric. And the second-generation prototypes they're developing go far beyond enhanced cavalry assets. With extraction scheduled through Davis's team, they navigated treacherous terrain while evading pursuit. When a search team nearly discovered their landing zone, they deployed a diversion device that created phantom heat signatures, drawing the searchers away just as the helicopter arrived. As they departed Afghanistan with the critical intelligence, Peterson and Sarah knew this was just the beginning. Their real battle, exposing Project Centaur and stopping its unethical research, lay ahead. 3 weeks later, the Senate Armed Services Committee convened a classified hearing. Peterson, Sarah, and Marshall, the only other Pegasus handler to survive, testified while Thunder and Athena waited in a secure facility. Senator Howard entered confidently, but faltered upon seeing Peterson. "This hearing is unnecessary," Howard insisted. "Project Centaur represents crucial national security technology. Technology that violates every ethical standard established for military research," Peterson countered, presenting the evidence they had gathered. The neural mapping data and tissue samples from Wilson's horses shocked even the committee's most hardened members. As the hearing progressed, the facility's security alarms activated. Dr. Adrian Kelso had launched a desperate operation to seize Thunder and Athena, his last chance to acquire the neural templates needed to stabilize his prototypes. Peterson and Sarah raced to the secure facility where a tactical team was attempting to breach the stables. They're not just after the horses, Sarah realized. They want to eliminate all evidence. Inside, they found Thunder and Athena already engaged with the intruders, the horses' combat training activating instinctively. Peterson issued rapid commands in German as they joined the fight, man and horse moving with the synchronized precision that had made Pegasus teams legendary. Kelso himself appeared, armed and desperate. "You don't understand what's at stake," he shouted. "These animals are the key to the next evolution of warfare." "They're not just animals," Peterson replied, "and they're not your property." As Kelso raised his weapon, Thunder exploded into action, executing a perfect combat maneuver that sent Kelso crashing into the wall. The remaining tactical team, seeing their leader fallen and facing both horses in full combat mode, surrendered. The aftermath brought swift justice. Senator Howard resigned in disgrace. Project Centaur was officially terminated, its research secured by a new oversight committee. Kelso faced criminal charges for ethical violations and the deaths of Wilson and Stone. Peterson, Sarah, and Marshall received pardons for any actions taken during their counter-operation, along with formal recognition of the Pegasus program's contributions to national security. Most importantly, the surviving Pegasus horses received guaranteed protection. A special sanctuary was established, where Thunder, Athena, and Marshall's remaining horse could live out their lives in peace, protected by the same government that had nearly exploited them to death. "What happens to the prototypes?" Sarah asked, as they watched the horses grazing peacefully in their new home. "Genetic modification reversed where possible," Peterson explained. "The rest will live here under observation and care. No more experimentation." As they stood together watching Thunder lead the small herd across the pasture, Peterson reflected on the journey that had begun with 6 cartel gunmen surrounding his isolated ranch. "They never understood what they were dealing with," he said, quietly. "Neither did Project Centaur," Sarah replied with a smile. 1 year later, Peterson sat on the porch of his new ranch, watching Thunder and Athena in the distance. The sanctuary had grown to include other retired military animals, creating a haven for those who had served their country. A car approached, General Hendricks making his monthly visit. The general had been cleared of involvement with Project Centaur. Indeed, his warnings had helped Peterson evade capture during the most critical phase. "How are they doing?" Hendricks asked, nodding toward the horses. "Adjusting to retirement." "Again?" Peterson smiled. "This time for good, I think. The new ethics committee is implementing all your recommendations," Hendricks reported. "No more classified breeding programs without transparent oversight. No genetic modification without clear ethical boundaries." As they walked toward the pasture, Thunder noticed their approach and trotted over. The massive black stallion still moved, with the extraordinary grace and awareness that had made him exceptional. But his eyes held a piece that had been missing during their years of service. You know, Hendrik said thoughtfully, in all my years in the military, I've never seen anything like what you and these horses accomplished. The bond between you goes beyond training or even genetics. It's something special. Peterson nodded, placing his hand on Thunder's neck. That's what Kelso never understood. It was never about genetics or neural pathways. It was about trust. Thunder nickered softly, gently nudging Peterson's shoulder in a gesture that needed no translation. Some partnerships transcended definition, forged in danger, strengthened through mutual sacrifice, and ultimately unstoppable when faced with those who understood only power and control. As the sun set over the sanctuary, Peterson reflected that perhaps this was the Pegasus program's greatest achievement. Not the missions completed or lives saved, but the demonstration that true partnership, even between species, created something far greater than either could achieve alone. In the distance, a group of horses moved across the pasture with the same distinctive precision that had once made them the military's most classified assets. No longer soldiers, but never ordinary horses. And as Thunder returned to lead them, Peterson felt a profound gratitude that their final mission had secured not just their own freedom, but a legacy that would protect others for generations to come.